Hello, everyone. We're going to connect some of the stuff that we've been discussing as far as the cell membrane and connect it to the nervous and endocrine systems in our body. So let's start first with the nervous system. Here's some learning objectives and your key terms for this portion. We're going to add a few more when we get into class together, but for now, these are the key terms. So the nervous system functions as the body's control center. It filters communication, it directs movements, it directs responses, it takes in stimuli from the surroundings. So it affects and regulates literally every other system in the body. The three primary functions can be summarized as the motor stimuli, it monitors all the stimuli in the internal and external environment. So not only do we have to know what's going on around us, but we have to know what's going on inside the cells and the body. Then it will process and interpret those stimuli and then cause the appropriate reaction to that stimuli. So it all is based on stimulus and response. So we divide our nervous system into two main parts, the central and the peripheral. The central nervous system is probably what you think of when we discuss the nervous system. It's the brain and the spinal cord, and that's it. So this is the part that's going to direct most of the activities in the body. The peripheral nervous system contains the nerves that extend from the spinal cord and brain out into the body. So basically, it's the connection pieces between the central nervous system and the rest of your organs. So this is going to allow for communication between what we're sensing and our body to that central nervous system. So there's a lot more divisions than just that. We're not going to really get into them, but I'm going to just list a couple because you've probably heard them before. So when we're getting into that peripheral nervous system, our nerves are broken down into either sensory neurons or motor neurons. Then the motor neurons can be somatic or autonomic. And autonomic is the involuntary response, whereas somatic is the voluntary response. So if I want to curl my bicep or extend my leg or twist my body, those are all voluntary motions that I can do. There's other things internally that we can do voluntarily as well, not just related to movement. But then there's also that autonomic nervous system that has the involuntary responses. That gets divided even further into our sympathetic or our flight and fight, or our parasympathetic, which is our rest and digest. So that's how we divide up the nervous system. Considering that the job of the nervous system is to take in incoming stimuli, process those, and send out the appropriate response to the stimuli, we need a way to take in various input from our environments or from within our cells. So we have various receptors all over our bodies. Some are concentrated more in other areas or in some areas than others, but these receptors are the things that detect various stimuli, either internal or external to self. So the one that we're probably thinking of when we think of a sensory receptor might be a chemoreceptor. So this is going to get stimulated when a specific chemical bonds to that receptor. So your taste buds, when a food attaches to the receptor in your taste bud, it sends a signal back to your brain that you're tasting sweet or salty. Same thing with your nose. It functions in literally the same way. When a piece of that chemical gets into your nose, it will attach to a receptor and send the signal back to your brain. Then we also have some that can detect different concentrations of chemicals within the cell, so we can tell if specific chemicals are in balance or not. We have photoreceptors in our eyes. These will detect light. We have rods that detect basically intensity of light, and these allow us to see in dim light or in almost darkness. It gives us grayscale vision. And then we also have cones. These ones are more sensitive to specific wavelengths of light. So the color blue may turn on one specific cone, but the color green and red and yellow will not not affect that cone. So these ones allow us to see in different colors based on the wavelength of light. Then we have thermoreceptors, usually in our skin, and in some places internally, these will detect what temperature the environment or your internal self is, so we can monitor that appropriately. We have mechanoreceptors. These will respond to pressure or your body's position within space. That's why even with your eyes closed, you can usually have a good idea of how your body is positioned in space, because we have internal receptors that respond to things like gravity or fluid as it responds to gravity inside your ear, things like that. These are found all over the body. And then we also have nociceptors. These are our pain receptors. They will sense injury. Sometimes they sense dangerous chemicals or irritants. So that's why when you take something like a hot pepper, it feels like pain because it's triggering a nociceptor. It's just a chemical that triggers it instead of injury or some type of, intense pain or heat or anything like that. Now, when we talk about the nervous system, we need to talk about the primary cell that makes up and directs these movements, and that is the neuron. So the neuron looks like this, and it's the thing that receives messages from wherever we got the stimuli from, and then sends messages back out to the body with how to respond. So all neurons have a cell body. This is where the nucleus is and the organelles and kind of the main cellular center is here. And it contains all the normal organelles that the cell would have. And then it will have multiple extensions. So around the cell body, it will have smaller extensions, and usually one of these extensions is quite long, and it will move away from the body and end in a various branchings as well. And so this part extends into organs, into other tissues, into other parts of the body, or just throughout your brain as well. So the shorter projections around the cell body are called dendrites. These will send messages from the body toward the neuron. So these receive messages. They bring the messages in to the neuron itself. Then that one long projection is called the axon, and this extension will send the response away from the neuron cell body and out into the rest of our organ systems. So messages come in to the cell body through the dendrites and go away from the cell body through the axon. That's how I remember it, away for axon. Now our axon is our primary conduction point of the neuron. So this is where we will be sending the electrical signals out into the body. And so this is covered in these special cells that produce a lot of fat called myelin sheaths. And these are going to help conduct the electrical message that the brain is sending, that the neuron is sending out. It's going to conduct that message faster. We'll get into the details of that in class. Then the end of the axon is very highly branched, and each of these areas will associate with various tissues or parts of the organ or even specific cells. So these are going to terminate inside our body systems outside of the nervous system usually. Now, when we talk about these ending points of the axon, at the very, very tip of one of them is what we call a synapse. The synapse is just the very end of an axon's projection, so the end of whatever that neuron is. And usually, these axons do not touch whatever they are going to affect. There's always a small gap between the end of the neuron and the beginning of the next cell, the one that it's sending the message to. So we call that the synaptic cleft. A cleft is just a gap. So this area has to be traversed in order to continue on the message. So this is why we need neurotransmitters, because the signal gets sent from the neuron to the bottom of the axon, And then at that synapse, if we want to keep the message going to a different type of cell, we will release little chemical signals called neurotransmitters, and those will diffuse to the postsynaptic cell, the next cell, and associate with a protein receptor and cause a response in that cell. And we'll get a little bit more into detail of that in class as well. So that's just the basics of the nervous system. It kind of preps you for what we're going to discuss in class. We're actually going to go over how does your brain have a thought? That electrical signal that gets sent, how does it get triggered? How does it work? What happens when we get to that synapse and we need to release a neurotransmitter? We'll talk all about that in class. So the next system we were going to discuss was the endocrine system. This fits very closely in to our nervous system because it's another one of our central directing systems. So often when we talk about the nervous system, the endocrine system is very closely associated, and they both work in concert to send and receive and direct messaging and responses throughout the body. So here's your objectives and your key terms. So the endocrine system is all of your glands. You've probably heard about glands. We're talking about your thyroid, your hypothalamus, your pituitary, your ovaries, your testes, your parathyroid, your pancreas, your adrenal glands. All of these are part of your endocrine system. And the whole job of these organs is to release chemical signals called hormones that will help the nervous system direct activities within the body. So, helps to direct the functions and processes around the whole body in concert with the nervous system. Now, the nervous system, it's electrical signal based. So these signals get sent out very quickly and then they terminate. If we want a signal to persist without the nervous system continually having to send these electrical signals out, the nervous system will direct the endocrine system to release long-term chemical messages. And that's what the hormones are. So these are signals that the brain tells the endocrine system to release, and we can actually have hormones persist in the body for weeks or even months. So hormones are just the signaling molecules sent out by the endocrine system. They will direct the functions of other cells, other glands, other organs. It just depends on what they need to do and what they were made to do, basically. So some examples are cortisol. We often think of that as our stress hormone. When we get stressed, we release cortisol to help stimulate and support our flight or fight response. Then we have adrenaline and epinephrine. These are released from your adrenal glands, and they kind of do the same thing. Adrenaline gives you like a surge of being able to respond, fight or flight. It will help you contract your muscles. It allows you to see a little bit better. It will stop your digestive system, because when you're fleeing from your life, if like a lion is chasing you, you don't really care about digesting your food. You care more about making your muscles work as good as possible to run away. You want your heart to beat more. You want to have better vision, better hearing, so you can respond to the threat. And then things like insulin. Insulin is released when we eat meals with lots of carbohydrates in them. In order for carbohydrates like glucose to get into your cells, insulin is the key that unlocks your cell and lets these things in. Otherwise, the sugar will just remain in your bloodstream. And then testosterone and estrogen direct sex-based responses within the body. And then the hormones travel through the bloodstream. So when we talk about the nervous system, we're discussing just movement of the signal through the axon down the nervous tissue itself. But when you're talking about the endocrine system, I need that message to go from my hypothalamus all over my body. And the best way to do that is to hijack the bloodstream. So not only does our blood contain waste products and nutrients and oxygen, and water and warmth, it also contains our signaling molecules as well. So the way these work, They will travel through the body, get to the cell that they need to act upon, and they will either attach to a surface receptor or they will directly enter the cell. And the goal is to create a response within that cell. Usually, we want the cell to do something different with its DNA, either start creating a protein that you weren't creating before, stop creating a protein that you're making, something like that. So the ultimate goal of a hormone is going to be to direct the overall way that we make our proteins from our DNA. And we'll get into that whole story when we talk about DNA. But let's keep looking at hormones here. There's two different ways, as I said, that hormones act on the cell. They can act directly by going into the cell and working with proteins that directly associate with the DNA, or they have to respond with some type of surface receptor protein. Well, why is that? Well, there's two different types of hormones. We have the first group, which are the steroidal hormones. These are hydrophobic, non-polar. So if we remember back to when we were talking about membranes, things that are non-polar can directly cross the membrane. So there's nothing to impede these little hormones. Larger ones, yes, they might require the aid of different receptors, but for the most part, these steroidal hormones are small enough that they can just directly cross the membrane and associate with proteins within the cell to directly affect the DNA. So they are going to just come right in, nothing's going to stop them. Now, when we have a non-steroidal hormone, these are our hydrophilic hormones. They are unable to simply cross the membrane. As a result, they have to bind to a receptor on the cell surface. Now, usually, we don't take this hormone and then move it into the body, or I'm sorry, to the cell. Instead, the binding of the hormone is going to trigger a cascade event inside the cell. Think of this as kind of like a relay race, and the baton has a message in it. And so the non-steroidal hormone transfers the baton to this receptor protein. Then the receptor protein transfers the message to what we call secondary messengers. There can be one, there can be multiple, it just depends. And those will eventually transfer the final message to whatever protein or enzyme is going to affect the DNA. So these secondary messengers, you may have heard of some of them. Cyclic AMP or CAMP is a very common second messenger. Oftentimes, some of the enzymes that we're activating are called kinases. Sorry, that was my dog shaking, if you heard his little jingle of his collar. So you've heard of some of these terms before, you just haven't put it together necessarily. And once again, the final end desire is to affect how the cell is working with its DNA. Are we making more protein from our DNA? Are we stopping protein synthesis? Are we activating different parts of our DNA? It just depends on what that particular hormone wanted the cell to do. So this whole process of passing the message from one chemical signal to another is called signal transduction, and it happens because non-steroidal hormones are hydrophilic, so they cannot directly cross through the membrane. And that is it. Let me know if you guys have any questions.